Hi everyone, it's Russell. Welcome to the Reading Fabricator. I hope you're all doing well. And today is an absolutely pleasant surprise. In between juggling a whole bunch of books that I'm going through, including Force of Nature by Jane Harper, and kicking off my Stanley Kubrick readathon project, which is The Killing, I think is the first one, which is Clean Break, which I recently just purchased. I thought I'd sort of just do sort of like an in-between book, something that's just nice and easy, has a different flow to it, and in all honesty, it completely took me by surprise. I was not expecting this. It is The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde by Robert Louis Stevenson. And if I'm being perfectly honest, I have not read a single book of this type before in my life. And by that, I mean Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, Dracula, Frankenstein, the H.G. Wells books, including The War of the Worlds. That whole area of books which cover, the gothic, the horror, and the sci-fi, I completely just skipped over. I sort of wanted nothing to do with it. I was more interested in different other things. But given how, starting with the beginning of last year, I wanted to sort of expand my reading and go down different avenues, reading this particular book, which in a way is actually a novella, a very short novella. I got through it quite quickly, and which was really surprising to me. It has now opened up a whole new pathway of books that even up to a year ago, I would have just completely just ignored. I wouldn't have touched it. I wouldn't have gotten anywhere near it. And it's fascinating to me. It's absolutely just hooked me. Really, really hooked me. It is a wonderful, wonderful, again, short novella. The only thing I knew about going into it is obviously the same thing that everyone else knows about, whereby the case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, not the actual story itself, but the twist, the thing involving Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. I think there are more people out there who know about that itself and the twist in the book than actually know the book itself, than have probably actually even read the book itself. I being one of them, I've known about the whole idea of Jekyll and Mr. Hyde basically all my adult life and even into my childhood. And yet I tried to put those preconceived notions to the side and approach this book, not so much that I already knew the twist, but just to see the writing style and to see how it approached that twist towards the end there. Obviously, all those that are probably watching this, you know about it as well, so I'm not going to pretty much tiptoe around it. But I tried to avoid all research into this book here so that I could have a fresh view, my own opinion of this book. And it wasn't until after I read it where I did the research into this book and the author that it shocked me even more. Reading this book here, which has these wonderful elongated sentences that just run on. They've got the I think you call them like the semicolon that just adds on to the sentence, so it just keeps on going, keeps on going, keeps on going, keeps on going. Where some reviews I came across were against it, they're just not used to it. I'm used to it. That's the sort of writing style I like personally. But reading it and reading the way it's described and the way the sentence structures are formed, I honestly, no joke, I thought this book, based on the way it was written, I thought this book was written in the 1920s or even 1930s. It shocked me all to hell to realize when I researched this that the guy who wrote Robert Louis Stevenson wrote this in the 1880s. This does not read like a book from the 1880s. It's so present and clear, and it feels as though it could have been done less than 100 years ago. The fact that it was done almost 140 years ago is just mind-blowing to me. I've never read anything quite like it, and to be quite honest, I've not read many books from the 1800s. Reading half of Anna Karenina, Jane Eyre, and even I think The King in Yellow was around that time, and even Heart of Darkness, which I think was written just before the turn of the century, I think like in the late 1890s, maybe in the early 1900s. It's such a unique thing to me. I always assumed that books written in that time period were of a different beast and were difficult to get into because of the way they used the language. I can see how this became something that just exploded as time went on and became such a phenomenon and such an influence, again, in Gothic and horror genres. And the way he approached it and wrote it is marvelous. It's fantastic. I'm really hooked into this now. And I want to read more by it. I want to read Dracula now. I want to read War of the Worlds. I want to read Frankenstein, Mary Shelley. I hear a lot of people out there really like Mary Shelley's work. So Robert Louis Stevenson, who the name actually clicked in my head. I'm looking at it going, okay, who is this person? This sounds so familiar. And then it dawned on me when I researched it. He wrote Treasure Island, another book I've not read, but another book that is just engraved in popular culture and has influenced many works, and is influenced not just books by writing, but movies and TV shows and music and even video games. So these works of his, of Robert Louis, who I've looked at some of his other bibliography, but the only two that really stood out to me was The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde and Treasure Island. So to get into this was an absolute treat. I mean, you got the tale of basically a lawyer by the name of sorry, I've got some notes written down here just to help you get through this. Gabriel Utterson, who was a lawyer and was a close friend of the titular Dr. Henry Jekyll, who up until that point there was a very social and outgoing person, and then just out of nowhere he just withdrew. No one knew what happened to him, and he goes on this walk with his cousin, who goes by the name of Richard Enfield, who's sort of a bit of a social climber. And the book starts with Enfield talking to Utterson and talking about how he came across this beast. Everyone that describes Mr. Hyde describes him as sort of being unhuman-like, despite the fact that he is human. He's sort of got this demonic presence to him, this disfigurement, and this also hidden, again menace. This feeling of unease being around this person. And he comes across Mr. Hyde basically running over a girl, and Enfield inquires that he pay the parents money to sort it out. And through this, he goes and he sees that Mr. Hyde is affiliated with Dr. Jekyll. This all takes place over the course of over a year. Now, this novella is less than 100 pages, goes by very quick. And so the fact that this book takes place over the course of over a year with various interceptions in between is marvelous. It's great. It's really well paced. A great flow to it. But this man, Gabriel Utterson, he comes across a will change from Dr. Henry Jekyll, basically announcing that everything to go to Mr. Hyde, and he's worried that Henry is basically being used by Mr. Hyde. And so he sort of goes on his own little detective story. This is the other part that I didn't pick up on this until about halfway through, where I realized this feels like a Sherlock Holmes story. It feels like someone who's just sort of going out of his way to sort of solve a mystery. And the fun part about this mystery is I think in this book there are less than 10 true characters, so it's very contained. But the way the writing describes him, the people, and even sections of the city is so expansive. The way he describes the buildings and the fog and the weather and the overall ominous feelings that are going around in England at the time is second to none. It's absolutely brilliant writing. So this is a marvelously written section about a third of the way through the book. It was by this time about 9 a.m, and the first fog of the season. A great chocolate-coloured pall lowered over heaven, but the wind was continually charging and rooting these embattled vapours. So that as the cab crawled from street to street, Mr. Utterson beheld a marvellous number of degrees and hues of twilight. For here it would be dark like the back end of evening, and there would be a glow of a rich lurid brown, like the light of some strange conflagration. And here for a moment the fog would be quite broken up, and a haggard shaft of daylight would glance in between the swirling wreaths. That whole section there is describing fog coming down. That's absolutely marvelous. So as Gabriel goes to solve what's going on, including trying to see Dr. Jekyll, who's gone into self-isolation, and going to also see his friend Hasty Lanyon, who is a longtime friend of both him and the doctor's him and Utterson as well, who is a doctor and who claims to be a close friend of Jekyll, but also disapproves of Jekyll's ideas behind the science of being a doctor. So you can see there's already a bit of a shift in friendship there. They just don't quite see it eye to eye. You've also got Mr. Poole, who's Jekyll's butler, and then there's a maid as well. And what you come to realize is that Jekyll's clearly hiding something, because he's always going out the back door from the laboratory, and this Mr. Hyde is always going in, and they always seem to be shifting and changing. I guess I should throw a spoiler there, but I don't see why I should, because obviously I'd be amazed if anyone out there watching this has not known this, but if you don't, then stop and read it. But obviously Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde are the same person, obviously. And what happens is it sort of builds to this basically this climax where I'd say the final quarter of the book, and this is my favorite part of the whole book entirely, this is what really sealed it for me, is basically a confession of Dr. Henry Jekyll on his life, on what happened, how he became Mr. Hyde, and the trials and tribulations that went through that whole process, and how he decided that the only way to stop it is by basically committing suicide, ending his own life. But what really got to me as well is that there's certain portions throughout this book where there's a murder that happens, and this murder is what really kicks things off. This murder is where everyone's basically trying to chase down Mr. Hyde and arrest him because there was a witness who saw it. But the description of the murder and what's happening to this person who's basically as described in the book, is having their bones broken and destroyed by like a cane, is absolutely grisly. I was not expecting that in a book, let alone a book that was written in the 1880s. And there's a wonderful part as well where I can't remember if it was Lanyon or Enfield described seeing a figure in their bedroom, just there, like this ominous figure. And it reminded me so much of the descriptions of when people were talking about this man in New Orleans back in the late 1910s, called the Axeman of New Orleans, who would go through the city at night and would threaten to kill people, break into their homes, go into the bedroom and kill people while they're sleeping, unless they played jazz music. The Axeman of New Orleans was never caught, but he's always been a fascinating figure in my mind. And strangely enough, that was the first thing I thought of when I read that section there. This section is in Dr. Jekyll's confession at the end, a little portion of it describing himself. I knew myself at the first breath of this new life to be more wicked, tenfold more wicked, sold a slave to my original evil, and the thought in that moment braced and delighted me like wine. But if I'm being honest, my favorite sentence in the whole book is basically within the first 10 pages. It's where Mr. Enfield is reciting a story to his cousin about the first time he came across this figure that known as Mr. Hyde and knew something was wrong. And he begins the sentence like this. Well, it was this way, returned Mr. Enfield. This is it. I was coming home from some place at the end of the world about 3 o'clock of a black winter morning. I was coming home from some place at the end of the world about 3 o'clock of a black winter morning. I have not in my life read any sentence like that in a book of the last 24 years of the 21st century. I don't know if people still write that way. And I haven't come across any that do, but I really wish they would. Admittedly, I haven't read many books in the 21st century, but there's just this use of language back then that is just unparalleled. And you have some authors from the mid-1900s onwards who basically copied that and put it in their own style up till today, along the lines of, say, Don DeLillo or Thomas Pynchon, and before their deaths, Cormac McCarthy, and even the little bit I read of Philip Roth. But there's not many who carry on that type of style of writing. It's a bit more clean, more crisp, but not necessarily more brain stimulating in a way. The words, just in that sentence alone, just shoot you off in different directions. Just thinking about all the potential outcomes. The way he talks about walking through at 3 o'clock in the morning, in the middle of the night. It's just, you could just as simply just say, I was walking home at 3 o'clock at night. But no, he chooses to just completely just make it cinematic in a way, cinematic in a written form. And all throughout this book here, it's just little pieces like that where, look, as a whole, it's a fine book. It's a fine book. It's not my favorite, but I just picked it up purely as just a little piece of fun reading, and instead I came away from it with a greater appreciation, and not only that, but again, an unlocked pathway into a whole new array of books I would never touch. So I'm not writing this book off. I think it's a brilliant piece of work, but what it's done is it's just opened up the Pandora's box of all this other stuff that I need to get to and read now. Add to the never-ending growing list of to-be-read books. This was an absolute fun read. I'm not really into the whole horror thing. I haven't read much gothic horror to begin with that. And again, I haven't read much sci-fi. And this in a way ticks all the boxes. Not only that, but it's just, again, the run-on sentences, the way it's written to allow the story to progress and flow so nicely that you forget the fact that it took place over the course of over a year. it just builds and builds and builds in almost ways like set piece after set piece after set piece. It's incredibly quick to read. I got through this very fast. And there were only a couple of spots where I sort of had to stop back and go back and read it because of the way, again, that with that writing style of the 1800s, it's written in such a way where you're just not used to that sort of thing. So you have to sort of go back and read over it to make sure that you fully understood it. But the things I'll take away from this are the descriptions of London and just the overall air of menace that is seething through the pages. And the fact that, again, as I said, it's just a distilled number of characters, less than 10 characters total in this book who truly matter in a way. I mean, there's more characters than that, but this is such a compressed thing, a compressed story. It's clear, it's focused, it's not expansive. The ideas are all there, and it's told in such a way as to be purely influential to future authors. And I see a lot of the adaptations out there have taken this and sort of expanded upon it. So in a way, this book here and the story is sort of like a baseline to build off of, to improve. I wouldn't say improve upon, but add to. And what was even more fascinating was when I researched the so-called inspirations for Robert behind this book, of which I found two. So I'm curious what you guys think of this. So the author had been intrigued by the idea of how human personalities can reflect the interplay of good and evil. Again, that's the main theme here. That's the main theme here is people and their ability to alternate between good and evil. And the term Jekyll and Hyde has been thrown around a lot for various, I guess you call it, psychopaths, sociopaths, serial killers, or just general people with some sort of, I guess, I'm going into tricky territory, but people who may have some sort of mental instability. So I guess there could be a case to be made that this might be like an allegory for mental illness. I haven't actually looked too far into that, and I don't know if I really want to. That might take away from the actual meaning of the book. But then the other inspiration behind this is it may have been inspired by his friend Eugene Chanterelle, who was a French teacher and a good friend of his that was living in Edinburgh at the time, and was convicted and executed for murdering his wife in 1878, so about 8 years or so before this book was released. That sounds absolutely fascinating. I didn't go into the life of him, but I could see how that would be an inspiration for Stevenson to write this book. This is such a unique thing. I really did not expect to get this from The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. And again, it could be written in such a way where it could have easily been 300 pages, easily. But had it been 300 pages, I guarantee I would have been skim reading like 10 pages every chapter sort of thing, because I think it would have just carried on and on and on and on and on. This just gets to the point. I cannot think of a single point of this book here where I was like, oh, well, they could have cut that. In all honesty, I was thinking of certain points in this book where I was like, well, they could have expanded upon that. He could have expanded upon it. But again, I view this book, the story and the thematics as a baseline of which to be influential for other future stuff to build upon and expand upon. And from what I hear, there are a lot of I don't know if fan fiction's the right word, but a lot of stories out there that have been based on the idea of The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. And I'm grateful for it. Again, it makes me now want to read Dracula, Frankenstein, War of the Worlds, and all the other things. The only other book I think I've read from that time period, probably the King in Yellow. Although, in all honesty, I remember nothing of that book. I need to get back to it. All I remember from it is something by the name of Carcosa. Although that might also have something to do with the first season of True Detective. I will have to read some more Chambers. I honestly don't remember anything from the King of Yellow, and I need to get into H.G. Wells as well. I think I tried reading War of the Worlds when I was a kid, and it just went over my head. But if the writing's anything like this, and I hear that H.G. Wells is a pretty impressive writer with regards to word structure and placements, so that should be quite a fascinating journey to go on as well. So what I've found is that the book itself I like. It's a good book, good story, but it's the avenues that it's opened up for me that has truly impressed me and has led me to have a more greater appreciation for a time period and a vast genre and array of books that even up to a year ago I would not have touched. I would not have touched. I'm glad I did. I'm glad I got to this, and it was an absolute pleasure, a joy. And it made me think. I sort of stopped this book and I just was thinking about it. And any book that makes me think is all right by me. What do you think? Did you enjoy the book? Do you think I went too far into it or anything like that? I'm curious what your thoughts are on the ideas and thematics that are present in this book. And in particular, I want to know what you thought of the writing structure and how you felt about the fact that the story was over the course of like a year. I liked it. I personally liked it. Thank you for watching and all the best. See you next time. Bye.